Another blood-red sunset and yet another moon phase, and still another 100 miles to my next resting place. Driving down the road, eyes on the horizon. Within my car, I'm all alone, but feeling good and feeling strong, knowing that this path I'm on brings me to myself. I'm driving.
Hey now all, I'm Joey C. Welcome back to another episode of Spirit Chirpa. This is the show that helps and encourages you on your journey to unlock your magic mojo. With me, as always, is the spirit doctor, Kelle Sparta. Hey, Kelle.
Hey, Joe.
So today we're going to talk about card play.
Okay.
We're talking tarot cards today.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
Tarot and oracle cards.
Okay. What's the difference?
Tarot cards are a specific structure. So they have 4 suits, and they have major arcana and minor arcana, and there's a specific number. There's a specific structure and a format to them. And you can buy 100 different tarot decks, and they're all going to have the exact same things, and they'll just have different imagery.
Okay.
An oracle deck is kind of a you never know what you're going to get sort of thing.
Really?
So an oracle deck could be something like one of my favorites is the fairy oracle deck, right? And it has different types of fairies, and it's got different categories of fairies and different things. There's even a blank card for you to draw your own fairy guide, and there's a whole different element to it. There aren't suits like there are in the tarot. So in traditional tarot, you'll have wands, discs or pentacles, spears or swords, and cups. In oracle decks, you could have anything. I have a Crystal Allies deck that has earth, air, fire, water, and storm as the suits. And there are no major or minor arcana. In fact, the deck does not get read upright versus reversed. They're all read upright. Whereas in a traditional tarot deck, if something's in a reversed position, it means something different than if something is upright. So if it's upside down, it's considered reversed. And if it's right side up, it's not. Oh. So you can I have the Power deck is one of my favorites as well. It's a great shamanic deck. And it's got an image on one side and the reading on the other.
So it's all right there for you.
It's all right there for you. There are as many decks as there are imaginations. So there's new decks coming out all the time, and you could go around the world and buy decks until you could fill your house. I'm fairly certain to get a different deck every time.
And I know some people out there who buy tarot card decks like they buy shoes.
Yeah.
What's the difference between them?
Well, and that's a great question, because I like to have multiple decks. And the reason for that is that each deck has its own eccentricities and its own energetic.
Okay.
So they're good for reading different things. So a lot of my friends use the Osho Zen deck. I like it. Mm-hmm. When I look at it, when I get a reading from it, I enjoy it, but I've never been called to buy it.
Okay.
I use regularly the Fairy Oracle, the Crystal Allies, and a regular traditional tarot deck. And I will throw in, depending on the day, the Power deck, and I also have a Sacred Path deck. It's Native American. Mm-hmm. And depending on the day, I may throw that in. In a traditional tarot reading, you would do what's known as a Celtic cross.
Okay.
You have one card in the center that covers you, which is the card that represents you. You have another card that crosses you, that's put sideways across it. And that's what the issue is that you're dealing with right now. Distant past is at the bottom. Things that are passing away to the left. Things that are coming into being at the top. Mm-hmm. And things that are in the future coming to fruition to the right. So now you've got 6 cards on the table. And then to the right of those 6 cards, you have a line of cards that goes up. From the bottom, it would be your allies and resources. And then your hopes and fears is the next one up. The third one up is I don't know. And then the last one is the outcome. So we'll put that on the show notes. We'll find a picture of that for you. I apologize. You can tell I don't normally do a traditional Celtic cross anymore. It's been years since I've done one. It's a great reading structure because it tells you what each section means, what each card represents, right? And what it's associated with. So that's awesome. And as a beginner, you like to have set readings like that.
Right.
Now, each of the oracle decks, for instance, will have their own version of a reading. So sometimes they might just have 3 across as, as an answer to a question, right? Or a single pull to answer a question, yes or no, or things like that. But they may also have their own version of a layout, which are usually variations on the Celtic cross, to be honest. But when you start to get into these decks, more often you can actually use them in concert.
Okay.
So when I do a reading, I will pull 3 or 4 decks and I will do a reading using 3 or 4 decks, and I will lay the cards out on the table intuitively, and I'll just put them in different places intuitively, and I'll interrelate them and intersperse them. And the reason I use the decks that I do is that the Crystal Allies deck is particularly good for emotional issues and dealing with what the emotional underpinning is.
Okay.
The traditional tarot deck is much more about physical structure of things and things that are coming into fruition and just what's actually going to happen, right? It's a physical reality. What is your experience going to be? And the fairy deck, the fairy oracle, is good for sort of insights from the fairy realm, insights into motivations, yours and others, and things like that. And then the power deck is just a straight, here's a concept, and this concept belongs in this read, right?
Okay.
So I like it because they all bring different elements to the process. And then, the Native American cards will bring in their concepts as well. That particular deck, the Sacred Path deck, is very much about conceptually what is the card about. So you'll read like 4 pages of history about what this concept means in Native American culture before you have to put it into play in your read.
Wow.
And so it's intense.
So you have to really know your decks.
You really have to know your decks to do that level of read, right? However, and I say this because a lot of beginners get into the do it right thing, right? And the fact is that tarot decks and oracle decks or anything are simply access points into your intuition.
Okay.
Okay. So what I look for when I go looking at things is I may not necessarily know the card itself. I can use a deck that I've never used before and I can still read from it because I will look at the card itself and the imagery on the card.
Tells a story.
It'll tell a story. And I look for what image comes forward for me because there's usually 6, 8, 10 different symbologies that you can see on a deck, on a card. And the one that catches your attention is the one that's relevant.
Okay.
Right? So if I'm pulling cards from multiple different decks and I see a series of moons and circles and, reflections in pools and things like that, I'm going to be thinking, we're going into the unconscious and the subconscious and into the ethereal world of the emotions because that's what the moon represents. That's what water represents. So I'm going to look into the symbology behind it and it'll give me some insight into what's going on. And so it also tells me as I know each card in the deck, I will look at the symbology on those cards in relation to one another and say, okay, so we've got 3 cards that are in completely different places in the read that all have the same symbol. So that's going to be relevant.
Yeah.
So these 3 cards are actually related, even though they seem unrelated. Let's look into what that means. And we go into the underpinning of that. The actuality of the multiverse is that there are so many more things happening than our little human brains can comprehend. And so the layers of meaning that can come through in a reading of this nature are very deep and very wide. So and it's all happening at once.
And it's more than just knowing, like you said, you can use a deck you've never used before, and it's more than just understanding the suits and the major and minor and stuff like that. And I'm assuming, regardless of deck, they still hold the same sort of core story to them, right? The
tarot do.
Tarot.
Oracle
when I
not.
talk about tarot, yeah. So that's that part of it. But the symbology adds a whole nother level to the read. And you've talked about this in other episodes before, how a card by itself means one thing. A card within a read could mean something completely different.
Right. I mean, the death card is the one that everybody freaks out about, right? The death card is meant to be spiritual death, which is a shamanic death, which we've talked about in the past, right? But it can also mean things going away.
Just an end.
An end, right? You know, at the end of a job, the end of a relationship, the end of a car dying, you know? I mean, it could be anything. And the context of it within the reading gives you what the thing is, right? And, you know, it could be a physical death, but it almost never is, right? It's typically an ending of some kind. And, you know, that's informed by the cards that are around it. And the same thing is true for every other card in the deck.
That's interesting. So I guess the simple next question is, how do you pull it? How do you know which cards to pull? I mean, I'm sure there's entire workshops that can be run on that.
I can't run a whole workshop on it, but I'm trying to give you an overview, and I want to give you stuff that you're not going to get from other workshops, because you can go and take a class on tarot, and you know, it's like, why should you listen to me talk about it? Well, I'm not teaching you tarot.
Right.
I want to teach you about how to think about tarot.
Okay.
Right? And so the question of how to pull it is really relevant, because there's a lot of schools of thought on it. And some people will say, well, you've got to shuffle it, and then you cut it with your non-dominant hand into 3 piles, and lots of complication, right?
Rules.
Yeah. Rules, right? And you know how I am with rules.
Yeah.
I hate rules. But I have some cards, like the Crystal Allies deck is massive. You're lucky I have my hands are huge. I have an octave and a half reach on the piano.
Holy smokes.
I have massive hands, and I can shuffle the Crystal Allies deck just barely, right? And so, you know, that deck is unwieldy for someone to shuffle. So usually what I do is I have them spin it around on the table. I have them just spread it out all over the table and mix it up, and then just pick the cards that call to them as they pull them out. You know, it's all going to depend on the size of the cards in the deck and what you've got and so on and so forth. Now, however, what I do want you to know that most people don't is something that I do, which I have found to be really useful, which is, if there is a card that you want to pull but you don't, you need to put that off to the side. And if there is a card that comes along with another card that you were pulling and you shove it back in, you got to pull that off to the side.
Okay.
If a card comes with a card that you were pulling, you should bring it with it. If you really don't want to, you got to pull it off to the side, because the things that we pull off to the side are the messages that we didn't want to hear.
Okay.
The card we did not pull, the card we tried to push back, the cards that jump out of the deck when you're shuffling.
Yeah.
Those are also relevant.
Okay.
Right? Those are messages that are like, you got to know this right now, right? That happens as well. So when you're pulling your cards, you want to be able to have that information.
You mentioned that you have them spin it around on the table and then pick the cards that call to them. So as the person doing the reading, are you actually choosing the cards?
No.
Or does the person who the reading is being done for chooses the cards?
The person who the reading is being done for chooses the cards.
The person doing the reading simply does the interpretation.
Yes.
Oh, see, I did not know that. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. But what I will do is I'll watch them and I'll read the energy of the cards in the deck. And if I see one that wanted to be pulled and they don't pull it, I'll pull it.
Okay.
Because that's the one they didn't want to look at. Right?
And that goes off to the side.
And that goes off to the side.
So I've seen people do readings for others, for groups. So you could read for pretty much any purpose at all.
Sure, I could read on the next election if I wanted to.
Yeah. How does that start? Do you just put the intention into the shuffle, or?
You put the intention into the shuffle, and you hold the intention as you're drawing the cards.
Okay. So when someone does a reading for a group of people or an event, to get a handle on that, they are bringing the intention into the reading itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, sometimes you can use the cards for a variety of things. You don't have to use them for readings to, you can use them to set an intention rather than to predict a future or to get more insight into something.
Oh, really?
So I have often been known to pull a card for the group that I'm about to run and say, here's the card that I pulled for us for today. This is the theme of the day is this card, and this is what it means, right? So you can use it for that. A woman that I know who is part of the Earth Spirit community, Sue Arthen, she runs a workshop on using the tarot for healing.
Oh, okay.
Which I find
for healing
really interesting. I've taken the class. It's fascinating. And, you can use it to tell stories. You can use it to get insights. So for instance, you might want to tell a story about your life and this is how you can use it for healing in one way. You can pull a series of cards to tell a story about your life or some aspect of your life to the other person. And you put those cards out on the table. And before you tell the story, you let the other person take in what those cards are. And they tell you the story that they get from the cards. And that informs you because those are symbolic and metaphoric representations of your experience. And now you've got a different perspective
on your story. That's super cool.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
That was one of her things. So
could you use tarot cards in an altar, for example? And if you
oftentimes people do.
Yeah.
So it's fairly common for people to use a tarot card or two or more on an altar to represent some aspect of what you're trying to
some part of setting that
bring
intention
together or put apart or whatever. So I do want to say one more thing about tarot, which is that we often use these decks to tell us what to look for in the future. We do divination with them.
Okay.
Right? And here's the thing. Here's what I see people do all the time at the beginning of their journeys. They will pull a spread and they will not like it. And so they will pull another spread. Okay. Or they'll pull a spread every single day, hoping that it'll be different. Okay. Don't do that. If you ask for the message, receive the message. Right? Now, sometimes you can get what I refer to as the bitch slap from the universe.
Right.
Which is, what the hell are you doing? Stop. Right? It happens. And you can pull a different pull on that. But what you have to do is you have to say, okay, if I choose this instead, what will the result be?
Right.
And you can do that. If you go, okay, I got the message, bitch slap from the universe received. I am turning around and I'm doing something else. If I do this, what do you say?
Yeah.
Okay, that works.
So you're changing the sort of question you're asking in that case.
Right, because you're receiving the message.
Right.
And you're changing as a result, and therefore you will have a new reading.
Right.
But you can't just go, well, I don't like that reading, and do another one.
Yeah.
It doesn't really, think about it this way. It's like walking up to an elder and asking them for advice and then refusing to take it. And if you do that over and over and over again, eventually you're going to walk up to the elder and they're going to smack you upside your head and say, shut up, kid, you bother me. Why should I talk to you? Because you're not listening.
It sounds like what you've taught us in the past about manifestation. And when you set the intention and you put it out there, you can't keep pulling it back. Otherwise, the universe is going to be like, forget it. And that seems like the case here. If you're just like, no, I don't like that answer, give me another one. You're not holding that intention of the question that you had presented to the deck.
Right. Sometimes you just get the answer you get, and you got to suck it up, buttercup.
We get what we get, and we don't get upset.
We get upset, but we suck it up.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's awesome. All right. So I think that's pretty much all that we've got time for today. Is there anything you want to say about tarot?
I've said a lot about tarot.
You did, yeah. No, you know what? I actually do have one other question. I've heard, and this may be not true because you've sort of countered this, but I've heard it, so I'm going to ask it so that other people can hear it. I've heard that you cannot buy your own deck. You're supposed to be given. Oh, the eye roll tells me it all. That one. Wow. I should take a picture of that, and that will be the cover to this episode.
The rules.
The rules. Exactly.
Oh my God. So buy your own freaking deck if you want it. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
If you want it, buy it. The thing that I will say, though, that is relevant that we didn't talk about is do keep it in something that will keep it safe.
Okay. Because
you don't want errant energies messing with it. So buy the velvet bag or the piece of cloth that you wrap it in or something sacred that you're holding it in. Consecrate that item before you do it by smudging it and saying you are sacred and I'm holding something sacred here. Intention, right?
Yeah. Because these decks are not just cards.
No, they're not. They're representations of people.
Right.
And if you do a reading for somebody who is icky, smudge the shit out of your deck. I mean, there's reasons why we hold some things sacred, and there's, we want to keep them safe. I have a box that is lined with velvet, and I keep my bags of tarot cards inside the box. They're in bags inside the box, right? So, keep them in a way that implies to your subconscious mind that they are the sacred objects that they are.
Right.
Right.
Excellent. All right. Another cool episode under our belts.
Yeah.
We are learning and being learned.
Rock and roll hoochie coo.
Rock and roll hoochie coo. Anyway, thanks for joining us this week, folks. And be sure to come back next time as Kelle adds another chapter into your beginner's guide to energy, magic, and the spirit world. I'm Joey C. here with Kelle Sparta, and you have been listening to Spirit Chirp.
Each mile I travel over 13,000 now. I leave behind a little fear.
Spirit Chirpa is the sole property of Kelle Sparta Enterprises and is distributed under Creative Commons BY-NC-ND 4.0 license. For more information about this licensing, please go to creativecommons.org. Any requests for deviations to this licensing should be sent to KELLE@KELLESPARTA.com. That's Kelle at KelleSparta.com. To sign up or to get more information on the programs, offerings, and services referenced in this episode, please go to KelleSparta.com. This episode of Spirit Chirpa has been produced by Honu Voice Productions.